Hello, my name is Dr. Teresa Lappe-Osthege, and today we're going to talk to you about our paper, International Relations and the Non-Human, Exploring Animal Culture for Global Environmental Governance. And because we're not in the same room, I'll now pass over to my colleague, Professor Rosaleen Duffy.
Hi, I'm Rosaleen Duffy and I'm from Sheffield University. And in this paper, we examine how centering animals can really address current shortcomings in international relations. This requires us to move beyond arguing for the inclusion of the non-human in IR debates and instead move towards analysing what doing so actually means in practice for global environmental governance. So we argue that centering animals can help us embrace and better navigate the scientific uncertainty that characterises environmental change. Centering the animal challenges the whole discipline of IR to think differently in order to embrace the non-human and move beyond its current anthropocentrism. So we really need this paper now because IR has always engaged with the non-human in some kind of a way, and the growing uptake of the term Anthropocene reflects that. But the overlapping crises of climate change and of biodiversity loss mean that we need to think much more carefully with animals. And in our paper, we argue that doing so is a conceptual necessity for the field of IR, and we suggest one way of how we can learn from progress made in the field of animal studies and animal geography. So the key conceptual contribution of the paper is that animals have largely been rendered invisible in debates about IR and global environmental governance, although more recent scholarship has sought to rectify this. So in this paper, we build on important contributions that have already been made from scholars like Fischel, Pereira, Simangan, and others. And while there have been substantive debates about how the Anthropocene requires a new approach in IR, Fischel argues, for example, that IR needs a bigger vocabulary and should embrace interdisciplinarity to address these overlapping planetary scale crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and health. So to address this, we bring animal studies and animal geographies into conversation with IR, drawing on the work of people like Van Doren, Cudworth, Giraud, Birdrose, Collard, Johnson, and others. And we apply this novel framework to an example that challenges approaches to environmental governance in order to develop an understanding of what centering animals actually means in practice.
So we examine bird crime and the governance of migratory birds along the Adriatic and Eastern Mediterranean Black Sea flyway, particularly in Cyprus and Italy. Now, flyways are a good example of why international cooperation is needed in wildlife conservation. They are important migration corridors for migratory bird species, which move between breeding grounds every year. So, for example, the Mediterranean Black Sea flyway, which connects Europe and Africa, sees more than 2 billion passerines or songbirds, and closely related to taxa during the annual migration. But illegal trapping and killing is a key threat to migratory songbirds. It's difficult to assess the exact dimensions, types, and impacts of bird crime on bird populations, not least because of its clandestine nature. So while the actual figures are likely much higher, it's estimated that between 11 and 36 million birds are killed in the Mediterranean region annually, with passerines disproportionately affected. And although it's prohibited by European law, for example, the EU Birds Directive, many are killed and trafficked as delicacies in the Mediterranean. So the illegal trade is often linked to culturally embedded traditions, meaning that their capture and consumption relates to social status or family occasions, or conveys a sense of exclusivity and luxury. So the governance of such flyways is actually fraught with uncertainty, not least because the migratory bird populations and bird crime is not confined to specific national jurisdictions. So in addition to that, although we need to follow the science is a common refrain, flyways and bird migration are actually characterized by scientific uncertainty. This means that data are often patchy, if they exist at all, or are of poor quality due to lacking in-country capacities, political will, and the absence of standardized monitoring methodologies. And this can have real consequences for bird populations across range states. So instead of seeing this as a barrier, we argue for embracing and integrating such scientific uncertainty in the design and implementation of conservation practice. People involved in illegally trapping and hunting birds rely on their knowledge of animal cultures to ensure greater success. They know the favorite flight paths, resting places, and areas with food. And as a result, offenders know where to place mist nets and lime sticks to capture the birds an example of which you can see in the photo here. So wildlife crime offenders already harness their knowledge of avian cultures, while official responses are slow to catch up. So our contention in this paper is first that exploitation of knowledge of animal culture already contributes to rising levels of biodiversity loss, as the case of bird crime along the Adriatic and Eastern Mediterranean Black Sea Flyway demonstrates. So second, to understanding and centering animal cultures can play a crucial role in adapting governance structures to volatility and ambiguity by helping to identify trends, making global biodiversity conservation more effective. But what actually are animal cultures? Animal cultures are the outcomes of processes of social learning among groups of animals. Flywhales are an expression of animal culture. So by taking multi-species entanglement seriously, we open up how we do environmental governance by integrating the hidden and marginalized forms of knowledge.
So what we do is we examine the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, or CMS for short, as the only international convention that attempts to embrace animal cultures to develop more effective forms of global environmental governance. It established the CMS Expert Group on Animal Cultures back in 2014, and much of the focus to date has been on whales, elephants and apes because they meet the very high threshold for social learning needed to be deemed an animal culture. We argue that integrating animal cultures, as CMS does, is very difficult because doing so fundamentally challenges the existing knowledge systems on which the architecture of global environmental governance is based. Linking back into IR theory, integrating animal cultures in our analyses directly challenges the anthropocentrism of the field, not least by calling into question the key concepts of IR that have so far guided our understandings of interspecies relations.
So by bringing together IR and animal studies, we argue for centering the animal to equip the field with better frameworks for understanding the scale of current environmental crises and pathways to address them. Using the illustrative example of bird crime in the Mediterranean, we identify the key challenges for global environmental governance and suggest one way of addressing these. It is therefore necessary for IR as a discipline to move beyond its anthropocentric roots to meet the intellectual demands of understanding, interpreting, and responding to the scale and implications of global environmental change. Now, this paper was developed as part of the larger Beasley Business Research Project, which was funded by the UKI ESRC between 2021 and 2023. The paper is based on 30 interviews with key informants, plus observations at field sites, hunting expos, and stakeholder meetings.